Chapter 6. The Inner Demon. The storm's aftermath left Leeway's clearing a sodden mess, with his tarp in tatters and his altar stones scattered like the remnants of a forgotten shrine. Yet, as he sat shivering in the pre-dawn chill, wrapped in his damp sleeping bag, a strange euphoria coursed through him. The tribulation of the storm had not broken him. It had, he believed, tempered his spirit. The scroll, safely tucked inside his jacket, spoke of such trials as gateways to progress, and the faint warmth pulsing in his dantian seemed to confirm it. But as the day wore on, a new challenge emerged. One not from the heavens, but from within. Leeway's body ached from days of meager rations and relentless practice. His hands, blistered from building the altar, stung as he tried to reassemble it under the weak morning sun. Hunger gnawed at him, his supply of foraged berries and the dubious spirit root herb barely enough to sustain him. Worse, his mind felt foggy, plagued by a creeping exhaustion that no amount of meditation could dispel. He pushed through, chanting the scroll's incantations and practicing the celestial crane posture, but the warmth in his core flickered erratically, like a flame caught in a gust. By nightfall, as he sat by a sputtering fire, the doubts he'd buried began to surface. What if the hiker was right? What if this was all a delusion, a desperate escape from a life he couldn't face? The scroll's promises of immortality felt distant, its archaic language more cryptic than ever. He thought of his mother's worried voicemails, his unpaid rent, the job he'd abandoned without a second thought. Had he thrown it all away for a fantasy? The warmth in his dantian, so vivid days ago, now seemed like nothing more than indigestion or wishful thinking. Exhausted, Leeway lay down, the scroll clutched to his chest like a talisman against his fears. Sleep came fitfully, and with it, a dream that felt too real to be mere imagination. He found himself in a vast, misty void, the ground beneath him a swirling sea of shadows. Before him stood a figure, himself, but not himself. This other Leeway was gaunt, his eyes hollow, his face twisted into a sneer that mirrored the hiker's mockery. "Fool," the figure hissed, its voice echoing inside Leeway's skull. "You chase immortality, but you're just a failure running from reality. Look at you. Starving, filthy, alone. This is your truth." Leeway's heart pounded as he faced this doppelganger, his inner demon, as the scroll had warned. The figure stepped closer, its form shifting to resemble his old boss, a stern man who'd once berated him for a misplaced decimal in a spreadsheet. "You'll never be more than a nobody," it taunted, its voice now a chorus of every doubt Leeway had ever harbored. "Go back to Beijing. Beg for your job. This path is a lie." Panic clawed at him, but Leeway remembered the scroll's teachings. The inner demon was a manifestation of fear, a test to overcome through will and clarity. He closed his eyes, within the dream, and focused on his breathing, just as he had in his meditations. Inhale, hold, exhale. He visualized the warmth in his dantian, weak but present, and willed it to grow. "You're not real," he whispered, his voice trembling but resolute. "I am on the path. I will ascend." The demon laughed, its form shifting again, this time into a distorted version of his mother, her face etched with disappointment. "You abandoned me for this madness," it said, its words cutting deeper than any blade. But Leeway held fast, chanting the scroll's incantations in his mind. The warmth in his core surged, a faint glow spreading through his dream body. He opened his eyes and thrust his hands forward, imagining a burst of ki to banish the demon. The figure wavered, its sneer faltering, and with a final, desperate shout, "I am enough!" Leeway felt the void collapse. He awoke gasping, his body slick with sweat despite the cold. The fire had died to embers, and the forest was silent, save for the distant hoot of an owl. His heart raced, but a strange calm settled over him. The dream had been vivid, terrifying, but he had faced it. The scroll described the inner demon as a barrier to Foundation establishment, a test of resolve before true cultivation could begin. Had he passed? The warmth in his dantian felt steadier now, a soft pulse that reassured him. He scribbled in his soggy notebook. Inner demon confronted. Spirit strengthened. Path continues. Dawn broke, casting a golden glow over the clearing. Li Wei rose, his body weak but his mind clearer. The doubts weren't gone. They lingered like shadows. But he had stared them down and emerged victorious, at least for now. He rebuilt his altar with renewed care, placing each stone deliberately, as if anchoring his resolve to the earth. The scroll, slightly damp but intact, was returned to its place of honor. As he resumed his chants, his voice carried a new strength, echoing through the trees. The forest seemed to respond, the air humming with an energy he couldn't quite name. Was it qi or simply the rush of surviving his own fears? Li Wei didn't care. He had faced his inner demon and lived to continue his journey. The path to immortality was fraught with trials, but he was ready for the next. With the scroll as his guide and the mountain as his witness, he would forge ahead, one step closer to the heavens. Chapter 7. Seeking a Master. The victory over his inner demon left Li Wei invigorated, but the physical toll of his mountain life was undeniable. His body ached from days of sparse meals and relentless practice, and his clearing on Mount Tai, though now a sacred space with its rebuilt altar, felt increasingly like a solitary prison. The scroll, his constant companion, had guided him through meditations and tribulations, but its cryptic instructions were growing harder to decipher. Words like harmonize with the Tao and seek the guidance of the enlightened tantalized him with promises of deeper wisdom, yet left him floundering. Li Wei knew he needed more than a bamboo scroll. He needed a master, someone who had walked the path to immortality and could illuminate his way. The idea of a master had always loomed large in the cultivation novels he'd devoured in his old life. Wise old sages, hidden in remote villages or atop misty peaks, who could impart secret techniques and unlock a disciple's potential. Surely in the shadow of Mount Tai such a figure existed. The scroll hinted at it, mentioning elders who guard the ancient ways, though it offered no directions on where to find them. Li Wei decided to descend the mountain and seek out a nearby village, hoping to uncover a hidden cultivator, or at least someone who could interpret the scroll's mysteries. He packed his meager belongings, scroll, notebook, the remaining spirit root herbs, and a few soggy berries, into his tattered backpack and set off down a winding trail. The descent was treacherous, with loose rocks and slick mud from the recent storm threatening to send him tumbling. His legs, weakened from hunger, trembled under the strain, but the thought of finding a master kept him moving. By midday, he reached the base of the mountain and found a dirt path leading to a small village nestled in a valley, its tiled roofs peeking through a grove of bamboo. The village was quiet, a cluster of stone houses surrounded by rice paddies and vegetable plots. Chickens clucked lazily, and an elderly woman swept her porch, eyeing Li Wei with mild curiosity as he trudged into the village square. His disheveled appearance, wild hair, dirt-streaked clothes, and a manic gleam in his eyes, drew stares from the few villagers he passed. He ignored them, scanning for any sign of the mystical. A robed figure meditating under a tree, perhaps, or an aura of otherworldly power. Instead, he found a small tea house, its wooden sign faded but welcoming. Inside, the air smelled of jasmine and steamed buns. A handful of locals sat at low tables, sipping tea and playing cards. Li Wei's stomach growled, but his pockets held only a few crumpled yuan. He approached the counter where an old man with a wispy beard and weathered hands poured tea with practiced ease. The man's eyes, sharp despite his age, sized Li Wei up immediately. "You look like you've been wrestling ghosts," he said, his voice gruff, but not unkind. "What brings a city boy to our village?" Li Wei hesitated, then decided honesty was his best approach. He pulled the scroll from his backpack and unrolled it carefully, its bamboo slats clinking softly. "I'm a cultivator," he said, his voice low but fervent. "I'm seeking a master to guide me on the path to immortality. This scroll, it's ancient, a manual for ascension. Do you know anyone who understands such things?" The old man raised an eyebrow, glancing at the scroll without touching it. A few nearby patrons chuckled, their conversation pausing to eavesdrop. "Immortality, eh?" the man said, setting down his teapot. "You've been reading too many stories, lad. That's just an old trinket, probably sold to you by some clever peddler in Beijing." Li Wei's face flushed, but he pressed on. It's real. I've felt qi, faced tribulations. I just need someone to teach me, to show me the next steps. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. There must be someone here, an elder, a hidden master who knows the Tao. The old man studied him for a long moment, then sighed. I'm no master, but I've lived long enough to know a fool's errand when I see one. Still, you've got spirit. Tell you what, help me with my fields and I'll teach you something useful. Not immortality, mind you, but how to work the earth. That's the only Tao I know. Disappointed but desperate, Li Wei agreed. The old man, who introduced himself as Old Chen, led him to a small plot behind the tea house, where rows of cabbages and turnips grew in neat lines. For the rest of the day, Li Wei pulled weeds, hauled water, and turned soil under Chen's watchful eye. The work was grueling, his blistered hands stinging with every shovel thrust, but Chen's instructions were precise. Feel the rhythm of the earth. Move with it, not against it. Li Wei, ever the optimist, began to see the task as more than manual labor. Wasn't this earth qi manipulation a way to connect with the natural forces the scroll described? As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the fields, Chen handed Li Wei a bowl of rice and pickled vegetables, a feast compared to his recent diet. They sat on the tea house porch, and Li Wei, emboldened by the meal, pressed Chen again about cultivation. The scroll says to seek an elder, he said, gesturing to the text. You've lived here all your life? Haven't you heard of anyone who practices the old ways? Chen chewed thoughtfully, then pointed to the fields. You want wisdom? The earth teaches better than any scroll. Plant a seed, tend it, watch it grow. That's the only immortality I know. Life continuing through the seasons. He tapped the scroll with a calloused finger. This? It's a story. But if it keeps you going, who am I to stop you? Li Wei nodded, disappointment mingling with a strange respect. Old Chen wasn't the robed sage he'd imagined, but his words carried a grounded truth. That night, as he camped in a borrowed shed behind the tea house, Li Wei scribbled in his notebook. Met Old Chen. No master, but taught earth qi manipulation. Path unclear, but progress made. He fell asleep to the sound of crickets, the scroll beside him, still believing that a true master was out there waiting to guide him to the heavens. For now, the earth would have to be enough. Chapter 8. The Forbidden Technique. Li Wei's time in the village with Old Chen had grounded him, but the call of the scroll's mysteries tugged at his soul like a restless tide. The old farmer's lessons about the earth's rhythms had sparked something in him, a sense that cultivation wasn't just about ethereal qi, but also about connecting with the world around him. Yet, the scroll promised more. Techniques to transcend the mortal body, to harness powers that could defy nature itself. Back in his clearing on Mount Tai, with his altar rebuilt and his resolve hardened, Li Wei delved deeper into the scroll, seeking the next step on his path to immortality. The mountain air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth as Li Wei unrolled the scroll under the flickering light of his campfire. His fingers, now calloused from days of labor in Chen's fields, traced the faded characters, searching for a breakthrough. Most of the text he'd studied focused on breathing exercises and meditation, but a hidden section, tucked between cryptic diagrams of meridians, caught his eye. The characters were smaller, written in a hurried script, as if the author had hesitated to commit them to bamboo. The forbidden fasting technique, it read, to cleanse the mortal vessel and awaken the spirit's true potential. Caution, only the resolute may endure. Li Wei's heart raced. A forbidden technique. In the cultivation novels he'd read, such methods were often dangerous, reserved for those daring enough to risk their lives for power. The scroll described a ritual of fasting, not merely abstaining from food, but aligning the body's energies with the cosmos through intense meditation and specific chants. The promise was tantalizing: a purified body, qi flowing freely, and a step closer to foundation establishment. The warnings, though vague, spoke of inner turmoil and trials of the spirit. Li Wei, emboldened by his recent victories over the storm and his inner demon, felt ready to face any challenge. He prepared meticulously, treating the ritual as a sacred undertaking. He cleared his altar of debris, arranging the remaining spirit root herbs in a circle around it, their silvery leaves glinting like tiny stars. The scroll instructed him to begin at midnight, under the moon's fullest light, so he waited, meditating to calm his nerves. His stomach, already accustomed to sparse meals, growled in protest, but he ignored it. Hunger was a mortal weakness, and he was determined to transcend it. As the moon rose, bathing the clearing in a pale glow, Li Wei began. He sat cross-legged before the altar, the scroll open beside him, and chanted the prescribed incantations, low, resonant tones that vibrated in his chest. The words were strange, a blend of ancient Chinese and what felt like primal sounds, as if calling to forces older than the mountain itself. He focused on his dantian, visualizing his qi as a radiant orb, purifying his body with each breath. The scroll directed him to forgo food and water for 3 days, relying solely on the essence of heaven and earth to sustain him. The first day was bearable. Hunger was a familiar companion, and the chants kept his mind occupied. He meditated for hours, moving only to adjust his posture or rekindle the fire. The warmth in his dantian flickered, sometimes growing strong enough to make his fingers tingle, other times fading to a faint whisper. He scribbled in his notebook. Day 1. Qi steady, body weak but enduring. Moonlight feels alive. The forest around him seemed to hum, the rustle of leaves blending with his chants, as if the mountain itself was listening. By the second day, weakness set in. His head throbbed, and his limbs felt heavy, as if filled with lead. The scroll had warned of visions to test the spirit, and Li Wei began to see them. Faint shapes dancing at the edge of his vision, like wisps of smoke forming human figures. He blinked, and they vanished, but the sensation of being watched grew stronger. Was this the qi manifesting, or was his mind unraveling? He pushed on, chanting louder, his voice hoarse but unwavering. That night, under a cloudless sky, he dreamed of flying through the clouds, his body weightless, the stars within reach. He awoke with a start, convinced he'd glimpsed the immortal realm. The third day was agony. His mouth was dry as sand then, his vision swimming with dark spots. The warmth in his dantian was gone, replaced by a hollow ache. The visions grew vivid, shadowy figures circling his altar, whispering in voices he couldn't understand. The scroll had mentioned trials of the spirit, but this felt like madness. He clutched the scroll, its bamboo slats digging into his palms, and forced himself to chant, though his words slurred into nonsense. "I am on the path," he rasped, willing the qi to return. Then, as the sun set on the third day, he collapsed. His vision darkened, and he found himself in a dreamlike void, not unlike the one where he'd faced his inner demon. But this time, there was no sneering doppelganger, only a blinding light pulsing like a heartbeat. He felt weightless, as if his body had dissolved, and for a moment he soared, the mountain far below, the sky infinite above. Was this ascension? The breakthrough he'd sought? He came to with a gasp, sprawled in the dirt, the moon high overhead. His body screamed for water, for food, but his mind was alight with clarity. The warmth in his dantian had returned, stronger than ever, a steady pulse that felt like a promise. He crawled to the stream, drinking greedily, and scribbled in his notebook with trembling hands. Forbidden fasting completed. Visions of flight. Qi purified. Breakthrough achieved? He didn't know if it was true cultivation or delirium, but he chose to believe. The scroll had warned of danger, and he had survived. Days later, a local hiker found him, half-conscious and muttering about immortality. The paramedics who arrived attributed his state to severe dehydration and malnutrition. But Li Wei, revived in a hospital bed, smiled weakly. They didn't understand. He had faced the forbidden technique and emerged stronger. The path to immortality was perilous, but he was one step closer. The scroll, safely tucked away, whispered of greater trials to come, and Li Wei was ready to meet them. Chapter 9. Alliance formed. The hospital stay was a blur of sterile white walls, beeping monitors, and nurses who looked at Li Wei with a mix of pity and exasperation. The paramedics had diagnosed severe dehydration and malnutrition, blaming his 3-day fasting ritual for his collapse. They lectured him about the dangers of starving himself in the wilderness. But Li Wei barely listened. To him, the ordeal was no failure. It was a triumph, a step closer to immortality. The warmth in his dantian, faint but persistent even now, was proof that the forbidden fasting technique had purified his qi, just as the scroll promised. As soon as he was discharged, clutching his precious scroll and tattered backpack, he returned to Mount Tai, determined to continue his cultivation. Back in his clearing, Li Wei felt a new sense of isolation. The forest, once a sacred refuge, now seemed vast and indifferent. Old Chen's grounded wisdom in the village had been helpful, but it wasn't enough. The farmer lacked the spiritual insight Li Wei craved. The scroll spoke of allies on the path, fellow cultivators who could share knowledge and bolster one's resolve. Li Wei, alone on the mountain, realized he needed others who believed as he did, who saw the scroll not as a relic, but as a blueprint for transcendence. His smartphone, barely used since he'd left Beijing, became his lifeline. Charging it at a small shop in the village, where old Chen gave him a skeptical glance, he connected to the internet and dove into the world of online cultivation forums. These were chaotic digital spaces filled with enthusiasts, skeptics, and self-proclaimed masters. Most posts were fanciful, discussing qi manipulation or mythical beasts with the fervor of comic book fans, but Li Wei sifted through them, searching for kindred spirits. He found a thread titled True Path Seekers, Ancient Texts and Modern Practice, where users claimed to possess authentic cultivation manuals. Heart-pounding, he posted a carefully worded message, describing his scroll and his experiences without revealing too much. Seeking fellow cultivators to form a sect, he wrote, must be dedicated to the Tao. Responses trickled in, some dismissive, others curious. A user named JadeSeeker88 replied first, claiming to have a Ming Dynasty text on qi circulation. Another, Moonlit Crane, shared photos of a meditation setup eerily similar to Li Wei's altar. Over the next few days, Li Wei exchanged messages with a small group of users who seemed serious, not just role-playing. There was JadeSeeker88, a college student in Shanghai obsessed with alchemy, Moonlit Crane, a quiet woman from Sichuan who spoke of feeling the Earth's pulse, and Iron Will, a former martial artist who claimed to have sensed qi during sparring. They were scattered across China, but the internet bridged the distance, and Li Wei felt a spark of hope. These were his allies, his nascent sect. Their first virtual meeting, held via a shaky video call, was both exhilarating and chaotic. Li Wei sat cross-legged in his clearing, his phone propped against a rock, the scroll open beside him for reference. JadeSeeker88, whose real name was Zhang Wei, appeared on screen in a cluttered dorm room, waving a yellowed book he swore was a family heirloom. Moonlit Crane, a soft-spoken woman named Liu Mei, joined from a rooftop garden, her face lit by moonlight. Iron Will, a gruff man named Wang Hao, logged in from a gym, his biceps flexing as he adjusted his camera. They introduced themselves, sharing stories of their own awakenings, moments when they'd felt something beyond the ordinary, whether through meditation, martial arts, or in Zhang Wei's case, a questionable herbal brew. Li Wei took the lead, describing his experiences, the qi sensations, the storm tribulation, the inner demon, and the forbidden fasting. He held up the scroll, angling it to show the ancient script. "This is our foundation," he said, his voice steady with conviction. "We can share techniques, refine our methods, and ascend together." The others nodded, their eyes bright with enthusiasm, though Wang Hao muttered about needing practical results over fancy words. They agreed to form a sect, albeit a virtual one, naming it the Order of the Jade Dawn after a line in Li Wei's scroll about dawn's light purifying the soul. Their goal was simple: to support each other's cultivation, exchange knowledge, and validate their progress. Zhang Wei suggested pooling resources to decode their texts, while Liu Mei offered to research herbal concoctions based on her family's traditional medicine background. Wang Hao, ever the skeptic, insisted they test their techniques in real-world conditions, like sparring or enduring physical challenges. The first meeting stretched late into the night, ideas flying as fast as the spotty internet allowed. Li Wei proposed weekly calls to share progress, and they created a private chat group to post photos, videos, and translations of their texts. Zhang Wei shared a grainy scan of his Ming Dynasty book, which described a fire heart meditation that Li Wei eagerly noted down. Liu Mei uploaded a video of her chanting under the stars, her voice hauntingly similar to the scroll's incantations. Wang Hao, true to form, sent a clip of himself punching a sandbag, claiming it channeled his qi into strength. As the call ended, Li Wei felt a surge of camaraderie he hadn't known since leaving Beijing. These were no ordinary allies. They were cultivators, bound by a shared dream of immortality. Back in his clearing, he scribbled in his notebook. Order of the Jade Dawn formed. Allies found. Path shared. The moon hung low over Mount Tai, its light reflecting off his altar's stones. For the first time, Li Wei didn't feel alone. The scroll's promise of allies had come true, and with the sect behind him, he was ready to face the next trial, whatever it might be. Chapter 10. The Beast Trial. The formation of the Order of the Jade Dawn had ignited a renewed sense of purpose in Li Wei. The virtual sect, though scattered across China, felt like a lifeline, their shared belief in cultivation binding them despite the miles. Each night, as he sat by his flickering campfire on Mount Tai, Li Wei pored over the group's chat messages, eagerly absorbing Jade Seeker 88's translations of alchemical recipes, Moonlit Crane's serene meditation videos, and Iron Will's gruff advice on channeling qi through physical exertion. Their encouragement bolstered his resolve, but the scroll's next challenge loomed large, a passage titled Taming the Spirit Beast, which spoke of confronting a creature of the wild to prove one's mastery over nature's primal forces. Li Wei, emboldened by his recent triumphs, saw this as his next trial, a chance to test his growing qi against a living adversary. The clearing on Mount Tai, now a familiar sanctuary with its stone altar and patched tarp, buzzed with morning energy as Li Wei prepared. The scroll's description was vague, as usual, mentioning a beast of the earth whose spirit could be subdued through qi projection and unyielding will. In his mind, Li Wei envisioned a mythical creature, a tiger infused with celestial power, perhaps, or a serpent glowing with ancient energy. The reality of Mount Tai's wildlife was likely less fantastical, but Li Wei was undeterred. He packed his backpack with the scroll, his notebook, and a makeshift weapon, a sharpened stick he'd carved into a crude spear, imbued with what he believed was a trace of his qi after hours of meditative focus. He ventured deeper into the forest than he had before, following a narrow trail that wound through dense pines and rocky outcrops. The air grew cooler, the sunlight dimmer, as the canopy thickened overhead. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig set his nerves on edge, his senses heightened by anticipation. The scroll had warned that the beast trial was as much about courage as power, a test of whether a cultivator could face the wild without faltering. Li Wei clutched his spear, chanting softly to steady his qi, visualizing it as a radiant shield around him. Hours passed with no sign of anything more formidable than a scampering hare or a flock of sparrows. Hunger gnawed at him. His diet of foraged berries and the occasional spirit root herb was barely enough to sustain his energy. But he pressed on, determined to find his trial. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest, he reached a rocky ravine where the trail petered out. The air here felt heavier, charged with an almost palpable tension. Li Wei's heart quickened. This was the place, he was certain. The scroll spoke of sacred grounds where trials manifested. Then he heard it. A low, guttural grunt, followed by the crunch of underbrush. His breath caught as a dark shape emerged from the shadows. A wild boar, its bristly hide scarred, its tusks glinting in the fading light. The creature was massive, easily twice the size of any pig Li Wei had seen, its small eyes fixed on him with a mix of curiosity and menace. His first instinct was to run, but the scroll's words echoed in his mind. Subdue the beast with qi, not force. This was no ordinary animal, it was his spirit beast, a challenge sent by the heavens. Li Wei dropped into a stance he'd learned from Iron Will's videos, feet planted wide, spear held loosely. He focused on his dantian, willing the warmth of his qi to surge outward. I am a cultivator, he whispered, his voice trembling but resolute. I command your spirit. He thrust his hands forward, mimicking the qi projection he'd practiced in his clearing, imagining a wave of energy to calm the boar. The beast snorted, pawing the ground, clearly unimpressed. Panic crept in as the boar took a step closer, its head lowered. Li Wei's chi felt weak, the warmth flickering like a dying ember. Desperate, he shouted the scroll's incantations, his voice echoing off the ravine walls. The boar charged, a blur of muscle and tusks. Li Wei dove aside, his spear clattering uselessly against a rock. Scrambling to his feet, he sprinted toward a nearby tree, the boar's hooves thundering behind him. With a frantic leap, he grabbed a low branch and hauled himself up, heart pounding as the boar circled below, grunting in frustration. Perched precariously in the tree, Li Wei caught his breath, his mind racing. Had he failed? The scroll promised mastery, not a humiliating climb. But as he watched the boar, an idea struck. The trial wasn't about slaying the beast, it was about connection, about asserting his will over nature's chaos. He closed his eyes, ignoring the boar's snorts, and focused inward. The warmth in his dantian stirred, faint but steady. He visualized it flowing outward, not as a weapon but as a bridge, a calming force to soothe the beast's spirit. Opening his eyes, he locked gazes with the boar. "Be at peace," he said softly, extending a trembling hand. The words felt absurd, but he poured his intent into them, imagining his chi as a gentle wave. To his astonishment, the boar paused, its ears twitching. It snorted once more, then turned and lumbered back into the underbrush, disappearing as if the encounter had never happened. Li Wei slid down the tree, his legs shaky but his spirit soaring. Had he tamed the beast, or had it simply grown bored? He chose to believe the former. Back at his clearing, he scribbled in his notebook. Beast trial faced. Spirit boar subdued with chi projection. Courage proven. He shared the story with the Order of the Jade Dawn in their next video call, embellishing the boar's size and ferocity just a little. Zhang Wei cheered. Liu Mei nodded approvingly, and even Wang Hao grunted in respect. As night fell over Mount Tai, Li Wei sat by his altar, the scroll open before him. The boar had been a test, and he had survived, perhaps even triumphed. The path to immortality was proving more perilous than he'd imagined, but each trial made him stronger. With his sect's support and the scroll's guidance, he felt ready for whatever came next. The stars above seemed to wink in approval, and Li Wei smiled, his chi pulsing with quiet confidence.